We have four presenters this morning on women in Islamic scholarship. Again, we have a range of geographical contexts, but we will start with Asma Sayeed. Asma Sayeed is Associate Professor in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures and co-director of the Islamic Studies program at UCLA. Her primary research interests are in early and classical Muslim social history, the history of Muslim education, the intersections of law and social history, and women and gender studies. Her first book, Women and the Transmission of Religious Knowledge in Islam, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2013, and it analyzes Muslim women's transmission of hadith from the rise of Islam to the early Ottoman period. She has published on topics related to Muslim women and their religious participation in early and classical Islam. Her current book project is on contemporary Islamic higher education and focuses on Morocco. And her presentation today is Female Participation in Moroccan Quranic Studies, Challenges and Opportunities. This is just... Let's see if it works. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all here. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I've promised Maria that I would try to keep this under 20 minutes. So I'm going to do some speed talking. And I look forward to your questions later. I want to start with thanks to Maria Daycake, Sumaya Hamdani, Aisha Noor, all those people who were involved in organizing this wonderful effort, especially in the context or with the backdrop of everything else going on. So the topic of what I'm going to speak about today is Women and Ulum al-Quran in Morocco, Challenges and Opportunities. And I will just start with, you want to realize I have my notes in one space and this is in another place, so I'm going to... Okay. You can do this if it's easier to move. Oh, that's true. Okay. All right, so this is how I'm going to cover the topics that I have to cover. I'm going to talk about the difference between Ulum al-Quran versus Quranic studies and why that's not just a semantic thing. And most of my talk will be on these two examples from Morocco, Bint Shati and Farida Zamurud, with a focus more on Farida Zamurud than Bint Shati, and talk about her application of this methodology, Manhaj al-Mustalahi, to Quran and gender, and then just very brief word in conclusion about the challenges of this type of research. So with respect to the parameters, I know all of us, or most of us probably use these terms, Ulum al-Quran and Quranic studies, interchangeably. And even though they're not mutually exclusive, I do want to call attention to the ways in which they're different. And as I said earlier, this is not just a semantic issue. The subjects of my research, and probably, if you travel to the Middle East or majority Muslim context themselves, use these terms differently, and they have different valences, which are really important to capture, I think, when we talk about what these mean. So, Ulum al-Quran, as I've defined it here, I would use it synonymously with Quranic sciences. It signifies that arena that's connected to an Arabo-Islamic sciences, a longer tradition of learning, a pre-modern tradition of learning, and it's the field alongside Islamic law, fiqh and usul al-fiqh, ulum al-hadith, kalam, falsafa, etc. And then Quranic studies, and I understand this might be a contentious definition, but I would define it as a field that is of European or American provenance, so primarily Western provenance. It deploys methods that draw sometimes exclusively, but not always, on the humanities and social sciences as they're conceived in the West. And sometimes Quranic studies actively rejects approaches that are developed by Muslims in the pursuit of objectivity. It sometimes applies approaches from biblical source criticism, etc., to the Quran, all in the purpose of, obviously, for academic inquiry, but the results of these two enterprises tend to be very different, and it's important to keep these in mind because women's studies of the Quran, which originate primarily in the West, and it's like women's contributions to feminist studies, feminist interpretations of the Quran, etc., often fall into this category of Quranic studies rather than ulum al-Quran. And this is, I think, a really, really critical difference because many of the women who engage with ulum al-Quran in majority Muslim contexts are overlooked because they are not at the same time engaging with feminist interpretations of the Quran. So I think that one of the reasons, I mean, forwarding the wrong. So, you know, we've had Miriam Kukla talked about women's scholarly participation. There's, you know, a lot of, there are increasing contributions now in the Western Academy to this topic, and you know, I've written a book on it. I also published an article or a chapter in a book, Women Imami Biographical Collections, which looks at the differences in between Sunni and Shi'i biographical traditions. And this presentation today draws on an article that was recently published in the Journal of Quranic Studies. Overall, you know, there really isn't as much attention to women's contributions to this field of ulum al-Quran. And so I hope that what I'm talking about today will help, you know, to fill some of those gaps and will help us think about some of those issues. As I said, I'm going to be talking about two very, very recent modern examples, which is weird for me because I'm a historian and I don't work in the modern period. But in any case, here I am in contemporary Morocco. So the first example that I'll talk about is actually, I think for those of you who know about women in ulum Quran, might be a surprise. It's Aisha bint Abdurrahman bint Shati, who is really well known, at least amongst those who know of her, who's really well known for her life and career in Egypt. But she was also a professor of Quranic and Hadith studies in the University or Jamiat al-Qarawin in Fez, and at Dar al-Hadith al-Hassaniya, which is an institute established in Rabat in 1964 specifically for the purpose of training elite ulama. And I recently came across an article in Hespress, which is a Moroccan periodical, which said, I mean, I don't know where they got this information from, but it said that she saw herself in a silsila, that is a chain of, let's say a chain of wording, that connected her to Fatima al-Fihriya, who is known to have endowed Qarawin. And that she was really, you know, she took a special kind of pride in her appointment to Qarawin to teach Quran and Hadith there. And she dedicated actually this 2-volume work called Tafsir al-Bayani wa Masail ibn al-Azraq, in which she develops one of her Quranic studies or ulum al-Quran methodologies, tafsir methodologies at length. She dedicated that work to her students in Qarawin and at Dar al-Hadith, which shows again her connections to that space of Morocco and of ulum al-Quran in Morocco. She's known to have had a Majlis al-Ilm in Rabat, and several of her students who are still living today actually speak very, very fondly of attending that Majlis al-Ilm and learning from her and following her to Cairo when she went, and then back to Rabat. Really fascinating, sort of very contemporary example of women's engagement with this in this space. But again, I think like some of the women who've been mentioned in this conference, like Nusrat Amin, Aisha bint Abdurrahman's contributions have not been as engaged with, because she's not known for doing feminist interpretation of the Quran. In fact, she is, often thought of as somebody who upholds a more conservative vision of gender roles. So moving from her to Farida Zamurud, who actually is only a little bit older than me and probably the same age as some of us in this room, a very, very contemporary example. I just want to talk a little bit about her educational trajectory and some of her contributions to tafsir. So, in line with some of what we were hearing yesterday, there are different types of opportunities for women in post-independence Morocco. And Farida Zamurud's educational trajectory very much reflects that she's a beneficiary of some of these opportunities. In post-independence Morocco, there were two educational tracks that were created. One is called Ta'lim al-Mu'asir, which is like contemporary education, and the other is Ta'lim al-Atiq. These are really interesting labels, because Ta'lim al-Atiq is like sort of a post-colonial reimagining of what pre-modern education is like, and it just, the labels are misleading. But in any case, Farida Zamurud is a byproduct of the Ta'lim al-Mu'asir track. She did not attend any of these Ta'lim al-Atiq institutions. She specialized in the humanities in Sidi Muhammad ibn Abdullah University in Fez. And it wasn't until her master's and PhD program that she became interested in Islamic studies, which was a newly forming field in post-independence Morocco in the 1980s. So her career actually tracks the growth of this methodology that was called al-Manhaj al-Mustalahi, and it's a reformist Quranic interpretive methodology that was in part introduced by her PhD advisor, Shahid al-Bashiqi, who has, just sort of a very interesting operation, let's say in Morocco now, to promote this manhaj. So every aspect of her career can be read as a way to promote this manhaj al-Mustalahi in different sectors of Moroccan and North African society, broadly speaking. It simply cannot be properly read. I mean, her career cannot be properly read, I think, in terms of sort of a woman's, she's not invested in feminist interpretation of the Quran. And so when we try to read her story in that way, we miss a lot of really important parts of it. So what I'm trying to do is read it in the terms that I think she would want it to be read. And this is after sort of many years of interviews and interactions with her. So just, to go over very quickly, when we're talking about mustalahat al-Qur'aniyya, these are words, I can do it actually. These are words that connote Quranic meanings, and they connote usages that didn't exist before the Quran was revealed. So salat, zakat, and manhaj al-Mustalahi is that methodology that focuses on identifying these key conceptual terms in the Quran and analyzing them across the Quran. So, as I said before, her career is a really interesting kind of space. It became a space for her to engage in manhaj al-Mustalahi, to develop it in every facet of her life. So her career spans 2 decades at Dar al-Hadith. She was appointed there in 2001. Actually, the first full-time faculty member appointed in Ulum al-Quran in the space of Dar al-Hadith. And on the right is her leading a dissertation defense for a female student of Quranic studies. And my point here is that she's not just producing scholarship on Manhaj al-Mustalahi, but she's actively engaged in the production of a rising generation of academics in this area of Ulum al-Quran. Lastly, she is not just somebody who, sort of produces scholarship for a niche group of academics. She is, I would say, involuntarily often pulled into the public space. And involuntarily because she has no desire for this public persona. But in 2005, after the reforms initiated by King Mohammed VI, she was asked to do a Dars Hassaniya on something related to gender. And she did her Dars on this Quranic verse about gender roles. And she was actually strongly critiqued by both feminists and secularists for upholding this idea of biologically differentiated gender roles. And they just critiqued her basically for being, a tool of both the government and of Islamists. And my last point that I'll make here, Maria, if I'm aware of the time, is that there's a different reading of this. And I think that, the different reading that I would like to propose is that she was using this as a space to do this work of promoting al-manhaj al-mustalahi. And if we look at both just the physical setting, where this is all like shots from a YouTube video, which is why they're blurry. But if you know the Dars Hassaniya, the speaker sits elevated before the rest of the audience. So she's sitting elevated, she's physically elevated relative to the audience, which is the king, and all these ulama and statespeople. And it's a 40-minute speech, on a highly technical speech on terminology of the Quran, on tafsir. And she takes these pre-modern exegetes like Zamakhshari and Qurtubi to task. So she's criticizing pre-modern tafsir, and she ends the speech by calling on the king and the Moroccan state to promote greater participation of women across public and private domains. So I think that this is a really wonderful example of her using a space that is state-sanctioned to do whatever she wants with it. And that, I think, is a reading that might be truer to her aspirations and what's going on in Morocco in different ways. So I'll end there because I know I'm out of time, but I wanted to I'm not done with the slides I had, but maybe in the Q&A we can talk about how she also reaches out to a broader audience through like pamphlets like this, in which she presents al-manhaj al-mustalahi in a comic format, a cartoon format, for consumption by a broader audience. So just 2 words of conclusion. I think that, for us as researchers, part of the challenge is when we see women, we want to frame whatever they're doing in terms of women and gender or feminist discourses, and that, as I said, misses key parts of the story. And so this talk is my way of sort of calling for a deeper philological, historical, contextual engagement with the substance of what women have written to kind of tease out what I think might be the real story. So thank you.